Hello and welcome to another edition of the Super Show. It is the CFB edition. I'm your host, Waddell, aka Deuce85, and I'm joined for a second week in a row by my guy, Kucheck. Very happy to have him. He's my partner in crime here, the JRP Whisperer, the finder of sneaky plays and the writer of the late slate for us on Saturdays. We appreciate all his hard work. We have a big show coming up, 14 gamers that we're going to cover. It is DraftKings centric. So if you FanDuel guys just kind of, hang tight, hang with us. If there's any FanDuel pricing errors or anything, we'll definitely talk about those. And I do write up about FanDuel in my main slate write-up. So you're not completely forgotten. Jake, how are you doing this week, man? We're on show 2 here together. And last week went pretty well. We hit on, Braylon Allen and some of our other plays that went really well. Obviously the passing game with Maryland. We have some good spots to target, but how do you feel about things overall?
Yeah, no, doing great. Last week was a good week. Kind of across the board, things went. I didn't quite get there on the Travion Henderson prediction of 200 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. Might have been a little aggressive, but we still got an okay game out of him. I'm pretty excited for this week to have a lot of good options to go with. So let's get into it.
Yeah, and I think he may have got dinged up because Mayan Williams came in. So I think if he would have played the full amount, you probably would have been right on. So you did suffer a little bit of a minor injury. So that hurt you a bit. But yeah, good week overall. We're looking to have another one. Main slates have been very good to us. We are going to go game by game as we did last week, give you guys our thoughts. As we talk, one of us is assigned to each game. And then at the end of that, the other person can give thoughts if they so choose. If you guys are watching live, thank you. On the right side of the chat there, you guys can put any comments, questions, concerns that you have. I'll check those periodically and we'll get those answered. If you're watching on demand, again, thank you. And we'll answer those as well. I'll check in, if you put any questions there. Definitely would recommend joining us at the FTNDaily.com site. We do have the gold package going on right now, which is all niche sports, which gets you college basketball, college football, esports, NHL, and a few others. And you can use my code DUB to get yourself 20% off. And that gets you into our Discord, which is, for me, I think I always say it's worth the price of the sub itself. You will not miss any late scratches or injury news. We have starters that we post before lock. I mean, I'm at work, my day job, posting starters for guys. And we've had guys who have been out 40, 35, 45% owned and the industry missed it. So definitely want to be in our Discord. And the way to do that is to sign up for the gold package through FTN Daily. All right, so for all 14 games, we're going to talk PrizePicks at the end. Lots to talk about here. Tomorrow night, I will be back with the CBB version with stills, so we have that coming up as well. Lots of good content coming up. Let's jump in here and talk about some college football. First game on the slate, Wake Forest versus Clemson. And Jake ended up getting a lot of the good games. People, my own site, they always accuse me of pilfering the best games, which I might have done a little bit. But this week, it just happened that you got the good ones. We have to mix it up next week. But there's a few here for me to talk about. Wake Forest versus Clemson. Right now, we have Clemson minus 4.5, 57 over under. It's a game that's probably going to go overlooked, and for good reason, because there's a lot of good matchups to target. On the Wake side, we have some injuries to at least monitor for GPP purposes, I would say. Right now, Wake Forest has been kind of running this two-headed, sometimes three-headed monster at running back. Christian Beal-Smith, CBS, as we like to call him. I think he's officially questionable right now. So if he were to miss, we do have kind of interesting play with Justice Ellison at 4.3K. It's against Clemson, though. As bad as they've been this year, their defense has still been pretty adequate, so it's not a greatest spot to target him. We also have some cheapies that we feel a lot better about, and in your games, I know you're going to talk about them. So I think it really becomes just a GPP spot here. And then Jakai Roberson, who I had used on one of the later slates last week, couldn't figure out why he wasn't doing well. Turns out he was injured as well. So if he's out, that definitely opens up things. I mean, A.T. Perry has been crushing it. Again, I know it's Clemson. They are still going to have the passing volume from Hartman to potentially be in play. A.T. Perry is a little bit high priced. He does have the target share with 84 targets. But then you could probably look at somebody like a Taylor Morin, who has 39 targets, Donald Stewart, who has 36, or Keshawn Williams, who has 30. A typical week, I think we'd be talking about it more, but with the theme of DraftKings lately being pricing errors, we have a ton of them on the football side. It's kind of bled over from CBB. So we're probably not looking at these guys, more at 4.2 or a Williams at 3.5, which would ordinarily be pretty decent values. For Clemson, they have major injuries themselves. Justin Ross is out. Galloway is out for the season, and then Joseph Nagata, I believe, is going to be out for at least the next week, possibly the rest of the season as well. So they're down and out. Wake Forest defense has been beatable. I think, the Collins boys are definitely in play here. 3-5 for Bo, and then 4-5 for Bo, and then 3-5 for Dakari. And maybe a little Juju. But these are just not spots that are going to be targetable for cash. It's more of a GPP game. I do think if you're one of those people that, MMEs or runs, 20 plus lineups, it's definitely worth getting exposure to, because how often do Wake Forest games, regardless of opponent, Army or whatever, do they go over? So the Clemson offense certainly hasn't looked great, but they have the weapons, with Shipley, with the pace, some of these receivers, of putting up some points against Wake Forest. And if Hartman's back is against the wall, I'm not going to count him out anymore, because he's going to either rush for 2-3 touchdowns or throw for 4 or 5, even without Roberson. So I think it's a mistake to overlook this game, but there's just so many more optimal on paper plays that it's going to be tough to really look at it. I did, see some people talking about Will Shipley. He's banged up a little bit, but he sounds healthy now, but he's 6'7". So I think that's just a little too cute. He is going to be a really big play for them next year. We're going to be talking about him a lot. I just think there's better spots to target overall in that next game we're going to talk about especially. So is there anything in the Wake Forest Clemson game that, you want to talk about it? I mean, with these injuries, it definitely looks like the value, but as I said, there's just so many other spots to target. I think that we're probably going to have to, leave them on the side.
Get a slate this large. It's pretty easy to move on from some games, and this isn't quite one of those games, but it's close. And so I would have more interest in Shipley if it was, I don't know, there's something like, it was something like 3 weeks ago where Shipley was like the only back they had, and he got all of the carries and had a great game, was massive chalk because of it. I think he was in the 5s price wise. If he was down there against Wake Forest, and we had one other running back out, maybe Pace was out for some reason, maybe I would be interested in Shipley, but I think there's so many other spots to either pay down or pay way up at running back. I'm probably not going to get to Shipley a whole lot. And then on the Wake side, I would love to say that I want to get to Hartman, because Hartman, I mean, we've all seen the ceiling. I don't think this is the spot for him, regardless of other values. And then there are so many other values. It's going to be tough to get there too. So probably not a ton for me from this game either.
Yeah. All right. So Florida State versus Boston College. I have -1.5 for BC, 54.5 over under. Definitely a chance to go over. We have an egregious pricing error in this game. I think everyone knows by now. Tell us a little bit about what we should be looking at here.
Yeah. So I'll get that out of the way, because that's going to be everyone's first piece to their lineup. And I've said this in my write-ups time after time. I'm not a big "you're doing it wrong" guy. But if you don't play Jerkovich at 4,500 in whatever lineup you're entering, you're probably doing it wrong, right? Like that's, I don't know if you've ever seen a more egregious pricing error, especially for a QB1, like a guy that's playing the whole game. It's not like this is a receiver they price down at 3K. Okay, whatever. Maybe he doesn't get the variance. Like, this guy is going to see every snap and plays well, and is going up against a bad defense. Like, this doesn't make any sense at all. So there's just so few paths to him not crushing at this price that if he gets injured in the first quarter, sure, he won't pay off the price. But that's pretty much it. Like, you could play just the first half and do really well at this price. So don't need to talk about that a whole lot more. Kind of a contrarian thing to do, and not, I don't know that a ton of people are going to go here. And I would say this is probably a GPP move only, is to pair him with Garwo, right? You've got a fairly cheap running back. As far as running backs go on the slate, there are much cheaper running backs, but he's also, I mean, 5,800. He's not in like the 9K range where you see the Robinsons and Breece Halls and Kenneth Walkers and those guys. if you want to go, game stack, pairing those two would be somewhat of a sharp GPP move, because I don't know that a lot of people are going to do that. I think a lot of people are going to kind of tend to pair Jerkovich with Flowers or Gill. And Flowers, I mean, he's explosive, but that price is up there. He's wedged right between Olave and Wilson from Ohio State, and I don't see a lot of people necessarily paying that much, so I could see that being a GPP move too. I think that there's a lot of a tendency to pair quarterback and wide receiver, which I don't necessarily disagree with, but you're also not getting much of a discount doing it with Flowers. Could go down to Gill, probably caps your upside a little bit. I don't know that Gill has quite the explosiveness that Flowers has, but you're saving a good amount at 4K. That's probably what I'm interested in on the BC side. And then on the other side, got a pretty mobile quarterback in Travis, and this seems to be his team. They don't really seem to be messing around a whole lot at the quarterback position anymore. So he had a pretty good week as chalk last week. I see this as a decent and beatable, not elite matchup for him. And he tends to be pretty mobile, so it's a little different analyzing him than you would a pocket passer versus what defenses can do versus the pass. And so if we see a lot of production coming from his legs in this one, I think that he could get there. I'm not super interested unless I'm completely game stacking this game. I think that if I'm paying $7K for anyone, I'm not going to put him in the quarterback slot because that's where Jerkovich is going. So if I'm completely game stacking this game, I'm probably running it back with Travis. If I'm using Jerk and that's pretty much it, then I probably am not going to get to Travis. Corbin for the high end and Ward for the low end with the running backs. I don't know. I don't really like either of those. We saw what Ward can do in the passing game last week. I think he had over 50 yards on just a couple of catches. Maybe they try to get him a little bit more involved. There's another guy that is lifted on DraftKings as a receiver, really more of an offensive weapon type guy, and that's Jakai Douglas at 3K. You and I talked a little bit about him offline, and that's probably the play other than Jerk that I'm most interested in from this game. I think people will tend to pay up at wide receiver with Jerk being priced the way that he is and not saving a lot of salary. And I think if you are able to allocate one wide receiver spot to a min-priced guy, he had 4 catches for 90 yards last week. He's been used very sparingly, but Norvell has been very vocal about wanting to get him more involved. And so if he had 4 catches for 90 yards and the coach wants him to be more involved after that game, that's looking to me like a pretty decent ceiling for a guy that's this stone man of 3K. So that's probably what I'm interested in on the Florida State side.
Yeah, I like that because normally I think the tendency most of the season has been for people to pay up at QB, and if they could find a cheap wideout, they do so. And that may end up being kind of the contrarian move this week with the mid-range to pay up wide receivers. There's a cheap QB. We've got some cheap running backs at our disposal. So I definitely like that play of rolling, Douglas there at 3K. I think that could pay dividends there for you if you want to have somebody on the other side. And I agree with you about the kind of the correlation, that a lot of people are probably going to be asking us this a lot on Saturday morning. Do I need to run back, Jerk with Gill or even Barry or somebody? Do I gotta, some people are really NFL minded. I gotta have a receiver with my QB, and I don't always feel that way. So I'm fine with the naked Jerk store just because of the BC, wideouts are kind of outside of Flowers, and even Flowers to an extent are kind of high variance with it. They do run the ball a lot. We know Jerk can run the ball.
And I think he had didn't he have 3 rushing touchdowns last week? So even if you do pair him with the wide receiver, but he ends up running it in, well, what good it did do you to pair with the wide receiver? And that's the same problem that I have with using Travis, right? Is well, if you want to get that correlation in, but then he ends up running in the touchdowns, well, correlation's not doing you much good there. So
yeah. Definitely. And then I've heard a few people talking about, running Garwell, in GPP and stuff as a leverage, pivot off of Jerk. So I agree everything when you said in that game. Ward's still a guy that I like. I had some shares with him last week. He got 9 carries and then had a couple of receptions, 2 for 56. So he's still involved, but there's just like you said with Travis, running and taking so much, it's really hard for either of the running backs to consistently put up, and Toafili is not hurt anymore either. So, all right, moving on to the next game, Iowa State versus Oklahoma. We have Oklahoma -3.5, 59.5 over under. Sooners had a little bit of drama, as they often do. They went to back to Spencer Rattler last week after a really tough game against Baylor. Baylor really shut them down and kind of rubbed it in their face. So we saw Rattler come in, and people that paid that $10K price for Williams were feeling pretty bad. So I think it's easy to get away from that this week. There's really no reason to even wrap yourself into, will Rattler play? I mean, he's $9K. Who really cares? They're playing Iowa State, who their defense is really pretty elite. I mean, they didn't look so good last week, but typically that defense of Iowa State's not going to be giving up a lot of points. They only give up 307 yards per game. So I don't really like using the Oklahoma guys in this particular matchup. Kennedy Brooks is still priced up at 7.4. It's really tough to get behind that when you have guys like Letty Brown under him, even Goodson from Iowa. So there's a lot of better options around. And then at this point, you guys know how I feel about Oklahoma wide receivers, especially when Mims is up there at 6'6", Hasselwood at 6K. I did like Mario Williams for a time. He's down there at 4.2, but it just feels way too cute. And you're just trying to force something that you don't need to this week. Typically, if we're starved for value, we're looking down at those 4K receivers and we're kind of talking ourselves into them and thinking, they had 5 targets 3 weeks ago, or they had 8 targets, a month ago. That's going to happen. And we're in a spot right now this week where we don't have to worry about doing that. And with the pricing so soft, we're going to see really high scores this weekend. So you have to keep in mind with some of these guys you might take shots at that have those low floors. Even if you miss on a lower price guy this week, you've been able to cash still, but you might not be able to this week if you miss a spot. On Iowa State side, Brock Purdy, you had mentioned, I think on the last one, they lost to Texas Tech, by the way, really brutal. It could be the Purdy game you had been waiting for. And it was, he did have almost 31 fantasy points. It worked out because the other QBs we were on scored more, but he did have a good game. And it's just kind of the same situation this week. Oklahoma's defense is beatable. He'll probably have to throw the ball a little bit, but their defense may end up, shutting them down. I think Oklahoma's getting close. I don't want to say they're quitting on the season because they have a good record, but it kind of seems like they were demoralized last week. Breece Hall is always in play at, 9.4, 9.5. He again got 28 fantasy points last week. He's always going to be hovering around that 22 to 25 range as a floor, which is nice. But we really don't need to pay that 9.4 because we have other running backs in probably a little bit better situations that we can rely on for cheaper salary. Hall's one of those guys where if you come to me this Saturday and say, hey, I have 9.4 left, this is my options. Should I play Hall? Can I play? Yeah. I mean, he's going to have a high floor. It's not a priority for me, but I'm not going to sit there and be like, he's a bad play because he's pretty matchup proof at this point. And then in the saga of Charlie Kohler, which has been years in the making, as chalk a couple weeks ago, he had 2 fantasy points, and with nobody in the industry playing him again for the last 2 weeks, he's gone for over 140 yards, 13 receptions, and 2 touchdowns, and he's still priced at 4.5. DK basically daring everyone to go there. I don't think he will draw that much ownership, but he is certainly in play at 4.5 in a matchup where they'll have to throw a little bit. Oklahoma is definitely, they're able to still score, but their defense is just so bad. So I could see Kohler doing some damage here. He projects pretty well too at a few sites I've looked at. He's over almost 14 fantasy points, which would put him right around, 3x value, which is pretty decent for a 4 or 5 guy. So I'm probably not using him. But target wise, he's up to 67 now in 9 games, 42 catches, over 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. I just know that if I go to him, he's gonna lay a dud. So I was really like the Charlie Kohler whisperer 2 years ago, but I haven't been able to return to that. But in the last 2 games, it's important to note he has 21 targets. So Purdy's definitely looking his way. I know Hutchinson gets most of the the hype there because of how well he's done, but Kohler's quietly just crushing, and it's really hard for teams to defend him in the way that Iowa State runs their offense, because you always have to account for Breece Hall, which allows Kohler and Hutchinson to more of an extent to do some damage. So Kohler's definitely in play for me, but this is another game where it's not a complete fade, but it's not a priority, and I think there's definitely some GPP upside here, but there's just so many pricing errors, more optimal spots on paper that I want to target. So nobody in this game I'm prioritizing. Do you have any additional thoughts there, or?
Yeah, I'm kind of in on Kohler actually. I might be one of those few people that think he's projecting well. And actually, I don't mind Hall either. I'm a pretty big Breece Hall fan, and against a defense that is pretty beatable, and in a game that I think that they're going to be looking to make up for for last week. I think Iowa State's going to be coming out of this looking to hit the ground running and have all the motivation in the world. Pretty unexpected loss, at least from my perspective, last week for them. I actually kind of like both of those guys. I understand they're probably higher ceiling guys than Hall, and I understand they're probably higher floor guys than Kohler, but I kind of like both of them for exactly those reasons. So we'll see how that plays out on Saturday.
Definitely. All right, moving on to Texas and West Virginia. We have a -3 for West Virginia, over under right around 56.5, 57, depending on where you look. Definitely some news here with Bijan Robinson out. So we have, the Roshan, Johnson, who I know you're kind of coming around to. We have an underpriced, in my mind, Letty Brown. So there's a lot to like in this particular game. There's some receiving options. So break this game down for us.
Yeah, so we'll start with the West Virginia side because it's easy. I want Letty Brown. He's kind of got that Kohler and Greg Bell syndrome on DK, where no matter what he does, they're going to keep his price in the low 6s, regardless of matchup, game flow, total projection, all that. Letty Brown's 6,100 on any given week. And I think that's bogus. I think he ran bad on touchdown variance last week. I think he fumbled the ball also at one point, and he ended up being in pretty bad game script, but then he ended up being involved in the passing game. So he didn't put up an earth-shattering score by any means. It was a rough game all the way around for West Virginia, but I think this price is too cheap here. I'm going right back to the well with Letty. I think he gets over 100 yards in this one on the ground. If he gets in the end zone, we'll add into that. If he gets some passing work, we'll add on to that. Kansas, the Kansas running back went for like 130 and 3 touchdowns or something crazy. I think Letty's at least as good as the Kansas running back, right? So I think there's definitely some opportunity for upside at that price. And I also don't want anyone else. I have no interest in any pieces of the passing game on the West Virginia side. So makes it easy. I hope that they decide to concentrate their offense as much as I'm thinking about it being concentrated if I'm using Letty, and I probably am going to do that. On the Texas side, it's kind of the opposite. It's as diversified as it gets, because they were giving Bijan 30, 35 touches a game, and now they don't have that guy anymore. And I don't think that there's really any one guy that is going to get a Bijan level workload. It's just they don't have a guy capable of that. And Rashawn Johnson is is not priced to the point where he needs to get that kind of workload either. I mean, at 3,800, he could get 15 to 18 touches and go nuts at that price, right? So Bijan was habitually priced in like the high 8s, low 9s, and so of course we needed to see that volume. We can get there on way less volume with Rashawn Johnson, and so yeah, I'm coming around to it. I don't think it's going to be an even split between him and Keelan Robinson. I do think we are going to see some touches from Keelan Robinson. It's not going to be, 90% Rashawn and 10% Keelan. I think it's going to be a little more even than that. I'm also interested in the passing game. I don't know that I'm going to get to Casey Thompson. I don't know that he's going to have quite the same game script where he needs to throw it as many times as he did against Kansas, and he's not going up against as porous of a defense. But that said, Marcus Washington went for 102 last week, and he's sub 5K. Xavier Worthy, if you want to use your QB savings and pay up a wide receiver like a lot of people are going to try to, and you don't end up somehow using all of your receiver spots in the Ohio State game. Xavier Worthy at 7,200, would you go for like 150 yards and 3 touchdowns last week? I mean, that's a pretty good performance. Obviously, elite game script for him, trailing by a bunch of points against a bad defense. And I think he had like 14 catches or something too. So I don't think he's going to get that kind of volume. But he's a pretty good option in this offense too. If you want to pay up at Texas, I think if I'm going anywhere, especially in cash where, you want to kind of guarantee yourself that floor, if I'm going anywhere, it's probably going to be to Rashawn Johnson. And then the receivers I'm probably thinking of as more GPV plays.
Yeah, so it felt bad because I kind of glossed over, as we tend to do when Kansas is on a slate, and didn't even look at Devin Neal really when I probably should have backtracked and not got so excited, because we know at this point and have known it for a long time that Texas is a bad rush defense, and their defense as a whole is not very good. They are giving up over 200 yards per game. It's a perfect spot for Letty Brown. Like you said, if Neal can do it, he can do it. So this is just an easy spot at 6'2". He projects as, a top 5 for me, a top 5 running back for a fraction of the cost for guys like who I'm also very high on last week, at least Braylon Allen, Breece Hall. Like, I think he has a chance to reach those kind of markers that those guys can get. Maybe not their ceiling, but floor for sure with the way he's going to be playing. We saw him with back-to-back 33s a couple of weeks ago. I think 30 plus is right within his realm. And then, with Johnson, I think the tendency is to kind of want to say, have Robinson's going to be, getting work. The nice thing is that Brooks, who would have been their RB3, is also out. So it's going to be those two guys. And Johnson, last year he had 418 yards, 6 touchdowns, like on 80 carries I have right here. And then the year before that, his freshman season, he had 123 carries, 649 yards. So he hasn't been like the primary guy, but he's kind of been that secondary option, and he's done well in it. So he's definitely not a scrub by any means. If like 15 touches, I think is a really safe marker for him. And I think it could be potentially more. If Texas has to throw the ball, they were incorporating Bijan in the passing game. Obviously he's a much better receiver, but Johnson, you can theoretically expect him to get 3 to 5 targets if it turns into that type of game. So 3.8 is just a way too cheap price for him. I usually like to pay up at running back. It's been a thing that has worked for me all season long, but yeah, it's just too cheap for him. And I think with the receiver core, there's only a couple guys they're really throwing to with Worthy and Marcus Washington. You could definitely look there. I've heard some people talking about running that trio in a couple of GPPs. I think it's a fine idea. But West Virginia's defense has ruined more than a few plays for us.
So when you say that trio, do you mean Rashawn Johnson and the 2 receivers, or are you talking about getting Casey in there?
Yeah, there's Casey. So I poke around. I call it the streets of collegiate DFS, but there's people that are talking about running Rashawn, of course, but then one of the receivers with Casey Thompson, which is a bit of a
no, that would make a little more sense. I thought you were saying both receivers and Rashawn.
I said that kind of weird. I said that kind of weird. But because I think most Johnson's just one of those plays where it's like David Jones for CBP today, just like one of those plays where even if you're trying to get weird in your GBP, you just kind of plug him in. I think that's what's going to end up being really high owned for him. But Yeah, so I just want to say that, keep in mind that West Virginia has kind of been a better than average defense, I guess. So I could see them ruining that type of
Well,
build.
and they're not Kansas, and the recency bias is everyone's looking at that game log saying, "Oh my gosh, that all the Texas guys went nuts that played," and so yeah, that's true. But they had crazy game script. They had foot on the gas the whole time, going up against a bad defense. I think Rashawn's fine because of that price. The rest of them, I'm kind of pumping the brakes a little bit.
Yeah. And we're capable of doing that. And it's nice to kind of internalize that and say that, because it does sound like people are getting a little excited. And sometimes, and I'm kind of more matchup, I guess, based than a lot of people are. I look at matchups a lot and I really put a lot of stock into them, and straight numbers guys just don't. And a lot of times it burns me, but this would be one that, I could see the passing game kind of suffering a little bit. So Letty Brown, though, I don't know. There's no ownership projections out yet. But his score of being like a top 5 running back, just he's got to be pretty close to a must play for me. I hope that people look at his last week or two and think, oh, he just you're not giving him the work or whatever they want to come up with, and keeps his ownership down, because I could see him really breaking the slate, which would be good for us. All right, next game, Purdue versus Northwestern. Purdue minus 11, 47.5 over under, which is different for Purdue. Now, this is one of those matchups that I really believe in, and that is the running backs against Northwestern. The problem here is that Purdue doesn't have a go-to running back that I can sit here and just plug in and say, yeah, I'm all about it. Now, if I'm running multiple lineups and GPPs and stuff, then I would get some King Duru at 4 or 5, because I think he could really detonate in this matchup. If they're going to give him, like, the 3 of his last 4, he's been over double-digit carries. If they're going to give him somewhere between 12 to 15 carries and give him maybe 3 targets, he could easily put up 20 if you would have to probably score. But Northwestern is really that bad, and we just saw that in what was my number 1 running back play last week was of course Braylon Allen. I know a lot of people had him. He's like 40%, whatever. But there's that type of, poor defense that Northwestern is just going to roll over and die against any running back that wants to plow into them. Now, they are decent in the secondary to the point where it makes me wonder about playing some of these Purdue guys. And I think a lot of people may chase, and now's a good time to perhaps jump off. We were all about David Bell the last week or two. He came through. I know a lot of people in our chat were on Jackson Anthrop. He came through. Milton Wright came through a week after I had used him. It's just a lot of goodness there. So I think that people may look and try to chase. And Bell's matchup proof, of course, but I do think that we could see Purdue turn to the run game a little more and try to get that going. Doesn't mean it's necessarily going to work, although it should. But we could see a combination of, Duru and a couple of these other guys. Although I do believe Cross just decided to go in the transfer portal, Jaquez Cross. So that's one guy that was getting carries that's off the table now. And then as far as Northwestern goes, I have a play that it's going to be very low owned. My first build that he went right in, and it kind of scared me because I just felt like it was very natural. But talking about a Kansas guy at one time, he's now for Northwestern, Stephon Robinson Jr., who's priced only at 4 or 5. He has 19 targets his last 2 games against Wisconsin and Iowa. He had 5 for 64 and 5 for 80. Very big play threat. He had a 5-catch, 115 game against Rutgers and an 8-catch, 116 and a touchdown game against Nebraska. Now, the Purdue defense, we just saw them get cooked in the secondary. Obviously, a much more potent offense, that they just faced. But they're definitely a defense that can be beaten deep. I was going back in the logs and seeing, they were giving up each game long of 49, a 53, a 70. So Robinson's really big deep threat. They have the QB play that is capable of hitting him if they're not that great QBs, but they can throw it up in the air and let him go get it. And I could see him getting 8 to 10 targets at this price tag, possibly more, and potentially breaking one for a long touchdown. I may have to reel myself back a little bit and not use him in like my main lineup, but I really think he's going to do damage against Purdue. And I think that this total is going to go over as well. Northwestern, they've got the personnel to at least keep this one close if their defense plays like it should. So Robinson is a guy that, like I said, I really, really like. He does lead the team in targets with 67, 40 catches, 569, only 2 touchdowns, but he has had a couple of games where he's just broken, absolute deep balls. And the fact that he was able to get going like that against Iowa and Wisconsin is the reason why I think he could definitely do damage, especially when receivers have been putting up some good stats against Purdue in the last few weeks, pretty much all season, really. Purdue gets into these shootouts, and we know that, and we just saw last week with the Ohio State guys going off against them. The week before that, there was Michigan State with Reed. Adrian Martinez was able to beat them for a couple of deep balls with Samari Torre the week before. Obviously, Wisconsin, Iowa don't really have receivers, but those last 3 of the 5 games, there was a receiver that beat them, and he profiles a lot like a Torre or a Reed, or even, like an Olave. I'm not saying he's to the level of Olave's talent, but he definitely plays a lot like him in play style with deep balls. So that is my sneaky play in this game. I think people will, again, gloss over this one, but at 4-5, I think he's probably a 6K type of player, and he's really going to get most of the targets. He has a similar target share compared to the volume that they throw. Now, he doesn't have the same target share as David Bell as a whole, but with the amount of times Northwestern throws, he actually does have, a pretty big target share for them. So I think he's in play. I might have to talk myself down. As far as the Purdue goes, I'm going to have some exposure to King in my GPPs. This is one of those matchups where I always want to target against their rushing defense, even with a team like Purdue, who doesn't have an alpha running back. They just, even 10 to 15 touches against this defense can do some serious damage. And Xander Horvath is kind of, I don't want to say he's on the outside looking in, but it seems like he's kind of eclipsed him a little bit. He did have 10 carries 2 weeks ago, but he could be in play as well at 3-4. So a lot of speculative plays. It seems that the games I'm not covering are the ones I'm playing in my main lineup. So I'm just getting creative here, but Robinson is a guy that I like, just to harp on that one last time. Purdue has made us good money recently. Is David Bell priced out now for you, or is it just a case of all these Ohio State guys are there too, and I want them instead?
Yeah. So I probably
segues us into the next game. So
what's that?
I said that segues us into the next game. So feel free to move right into that when you're done.
Yeah, so I probably am not going to go to a whole lot of David Bell here. I probably would have a little bit of interest in Anthrop, just because he gets used a little bit more in the running game, and maybe that's part of their game plan in terms of getting the run game going is keeping him involved and getting him some touches that way. But really, just not a whole lot of interest. And Robinson, one thing I like that you brought up, that he does have that deep ball ability. With guys that are in low total games and are also the dog in those games, one thing I worry about them is their team just having the ball enough for them to get to the production we need them to get to. And if you have a guy that can make some splash plays, some plays downfield, that helps alleviate some of that risk, because you got that mitigated. You could go 4 for 30 for the first half and then break one in the third quarter, and then you got there, right? So it is nice to have some big playability if you're going to go dumpster diving a little bit with those low price guys. So,
all right,
if we can talk about the another Big Ten matchup, which the way that Ohio State and Michigan State are playing this year just is completely antithetical to what I kind of think of as Big Ten football, right? Like, this is teams that are looking really good, and Kenneth Walker is obviously a pound it kind of back, but teams that are looking really good in the vertical passing game, and Michigan State's defense, everyone that plays them looks good in the vertical passing game. They're just giving up all kinds of passing yards. So with that being said, I don't think I've played CJ Stroud once this year, other than opening day, when he was still priced in like the low 8s, maybe 8,000 or something. He's just like the price has gotten insane, and he doesn't run at all. He doesn't need to, right? If they're going to run, they're going to run with Henderson, and his O-line is so good. He's like almost never under any kind of duress, and his receivers are so good that they get open faster than anybody can put pressure on him. So unless it's a designed run, which they aren't doing at all, and they did a lot of with Fields last year, He doesn't have the rushing upside, but this is a matchup where he totally has the passing upside. And we'll get into PrizePicks later. His passing yardage total is, I think, like 317.5 or something on PrizePicks. And I think that's light by about 150 yards. He's going to go way over that total. He'll probably get to the 317 in the first half, maybe the first quarter. This is just the nut matchup for Stroud. And since we have that other cheap quarterback, I know that there's some inkling to want to go 4 RBs when possible and guarantee yourself, those locked in points. But boy, do I want to use CJ Stroud this week, even at that high price. And I don't want to use him with a single receiver. I want to use him with at least 2 receivers. If I can get creative enough to find a way to get all 3 of Olave and Wilson and JSN in there. Olave and Wilson are going to be the 2 that are easy to get into your builds. Getting JS in there is a little tougher. Price is and it's odd to me that he's the highest priced of the 3 2 weeks in a row now, just because everybody has known Olave and Wilson for so long, and JSN's a little bit newer on the scene, but they're all so explosive. And against this just absolutely terrible passing defense, they're all going to get there. It's not a question of if they're going to score points. It's how many points. And so if you want to pick one and think that he's going to be the alpha, great. I think you're better off picking 2, and those 2 are probably going to get there. That floor is going to be there with plenty of ceiling. And if you want to get to all 3 paired with Stroud, I usually would hate that, but I kind of don't hate that. I think if you threw 3 Purdue receivers at the wall last week or a couple weeks ago, it probably did okay. And Maryland even got there, with not overly talented quarterback play, got at least 2 receivers to do pretty well. I don't know about 3, but this is, I don't know if there's, if I can remember anyway, a better combination of talent in the passing game versus terrible pass defense. So yes, I like CJ Stroud and I like all of his weapons. If you want to get crazy and throw some Rutgers in there too, I wouldn't blame you for doing that. As much as I like TreVeyon Henderson, I don't know that I want to go there this time. I think that this is going to be mainly a passing game on both sides. On for Ohio State because it's going to be easy, and for Michigan State because they're going to have to keep up. They're chasing 3 scores, so that teams generally tend to pass a little bit more. So to transition into that side, and obviously I love most of the pieces that people are going to have from the Ohio State side. Transition to the Michigan State side. I don't particularly want to play Peyton Thorne ever. I think there's almost always going to be better plays with more upside at whatever price range he's at. And you're definitely not playing him over a jerk, right? So if you're rolling a 1 QB lineup, no, you're not doing that. Walker's pricey. Ohio State is beatable by land and by air, so I would get the play that if you're just going to completely game stack this one, getting to Walker kind of makes sense in that world. I'm probably a little bit more interested in getting to Reed, who's seen plenty of volume with Naylor out, and I believe Naylor will continue to be out. So if you're going to run it back with a receiver, Reed to me is the obvious choice. If you want to get a little bit cuter than that and go down to Mosley, who's the only other receiver that is, has seen somewhat consistent volume, I can see doing that too and save yourself some bucks, but you really don't need to because there's so many other spots to save money on this slate. So I think with this game, it's Stroud and a minimum of 2 receivers, whichever 2 you like, along with Reed, and I think that's going to be a pretty common thing that I do in a lot of lineups.
Yeah, the Sparty secondary, yeah, it's the nuts. Like you said, they're giving up 329.4 yards through the air, which is bottom nearly, not dead last, but it's getting close. Bottom 10 at least. And we've just continually for weeks now, keep referencing it, but that Michigan game a few weeks ago, I was just really it was gnawing at me about the McNamara thing because he just destroyed him. So we were on O'Connell, he went off. Everybody, catching up by then is on Baby Tua. He went off. We went a little different than the field and got some Okonkwo ham, which was nice. And then this week, it's just it's been a cheap QB that we've been able to play, and I'm kind of like, you mentioned the 4 RB thing. I'm always a big proponent of that on main slate, but this is a matchup again I believe in, and I haven't been paying up for QBs very much this year at all on main slate. Do it on the side slates all the time, of course, but main slate I haven't been paying up for it, and it really hasn't been hurting me. But this is a spot where he could possibly throw for 500. I hope that Michigan State can keep it somewhat close. It's 19-point spread, so it's 68.5 over under too, by the way. So lots of points to be scored. But Ohio State may just, they may be in that range where they have to win games convincingly here to really.
Well, that was another thing that I think I was mentally thinking about and not going into is that this isn't the Ohio State team that's number one in the country, that they've been 1 or 2, right? That they've been so accustomed to being. They're 4, and so they're gonna. It's November. It's foot on the gas time, kind of no matter what, to make sure they keep in the CFP. And so even if they're up, by a good 3 scores in the third quarter, I see them continuing to throw the ball, and they were doing that last week too. So
yeah, for sure.
To that same point.
Yeah, definitely. So I gotta be on board with the pay up of Stroud. We have running backs that are available to us that are cheap. So I am going to the traditional 2 QB route. I did run 2 QBs last week too. I mean, Baby Tua and O'Connell. How could you not? So
right.
I'm definitely, as the season has worn on, with the house of 4 RBs has been running the 2 QBs, and it's gonna work. But we're gonna see a lot of chalk. We saw a lot last week. It's just a matter of that 1 or 2 spots to be different. And with Maryland receivers is where we did it. So now I'm looking at it, Ohio State receivers, like you mentioned, people are probably going to go with Wilson and probably a fair amount Olave too. I think those are the 2 obvious ones, right? I want to have a GPP lineup with all 3, like you mentioned. I wish JSN was cheap. He made us a lot of money a couple weeks ago and he was cheap. But I think 2 is definitely the build I'm going, with that triple stack there with the 2 receivers. If you can make the salary work and you punt 2 running backs, because it is possible, you could maybe run all 3, but definitely with the 2. And where you get different is instead of running 3, you go Wilson, JSN, or you go Olave, JSN. It really, to me, Olave got there in the end, but it really, to me, seemed like Stroud was favoring Wilson and JSN because they were just beating their defender over and over and over again deep. And I kind of feel like that's going to happen again. I mean, it should against the Sparty. So Olave will get his, but it does seem like the other 2 may have the bigger game breaking plays.
It seems like the Olave targets have been a little bit more manufactured. Like they're trying to keep him happy and get him involved. And the others just kind of happen naturally because they have like 15 yards of separation.
Yep.
Right. So I think if I'm running 2 in GPP, probably Wilson and JSN is the way that I'm going to do that, because I think that's going to be a little bit more uncommon. I think people probably say, oh, Wilson and Olave are pretty cheap. Okay, I'm going to go to those 2. And I think JSN has differentiating ability, and we have the week where we have so much value elsewhere that we can pay that extra amount and not give a whole lot up for doing that.
Yeah. So just a little thing to throw out there about how if you want to, get a little different from the rest of the crowd without giving up that, that heat spot for chalk, playing a JSN with the Wilson or, like you said, with leaving Olave off in one of your GBPs. A lot of his stuff last week too was underneath. Like you said, they're generating it. Right. So he's just not getting that separation. JSN's just so damn fast that no one can guard him one-on-one. And Wilson's he's got all these juke moves. When you watch him run his routes, is a thing of beauty. So as far as the other side go, for me, it seems like an easier week to fade Walker. I got away with it last week. He did have a good game, of course, but I think I'm going to not, it's going to be hard to go that way. I mean, first of all, if you're going to be paying up for JSN, it'll be impossible to go that way, but you can definitely do it. And then you mentioned with the run back of Jaden Reed, that's the most obvious option with Naylor, ailing. You could potentially look at maybe a Trey Mosley, who has had 7 catches in the last 2 weeks. There was a time where people were all about Monterey Foster, and I kind of don't know why, but he did catch a 52-yard touchdown last week, so I guess that's cool, but his target share just isn't there, and I don't think we need him. So if you're going to run it back, the safe play is with Reed at 6'5", but there's so many other WR3s that I'm looking at. I'm having a hard time. I mentioned I might be under the field, and you were kind of taken aback by it, and I think you're right. It's probably the smart cash move. I just don't know if I'm going to get there because I haven't decided what I want to do with running back beyond Roschon Johnson just yet. But they're definitely the game to target. I mean, anytime Michigan State's on the slate, we're targeting against them. All right, so we've been gushing about these games. The next 2 are kind of mess, so I'm gonna move us through them kind of quickly, so we can stay on time. But Rutgers versus Penn State, -17 for Penn State, 46.5 total. Last week, I was pretty high on Bo Melton. He ended up, I said his floor was 5 for 50, and wouldn't you know it, that's what he put up, was 5 for 50. Now he's up to 5.2. It's kind of hard to use him in this spot just because there's those other WR3s we like, but he's very consistent. I mean, 5, 6, 7 catches, very, very, very consistent. The touchdown, it was very frustrating because Rutgers, we expected them to pass a lot, and they kind of did, but the touchdowns were just on the ground every single time. I mean, they were having backup running backs, backup QBs. I mean, everybody on their roster besides the wide receivers were scoring touchdowns. So that was ultimate tilt because Melton easily could have had 2 scores and melted the slate for us last week, but it didn't work out that way. And then with Penn State, the defense of Rutgers, this is going to be a spot where people probably overlook Penn State just because of all the other options. And I mean, Dotson's 8.4 is still extremely expensive, but I would not be surprised to see Dotson put up one of his, 10-152 games. And people are like, oh, damn, I should have got some of, Jahan Dotson, because nobody on Rutgers is going to be able to face him one-on-one. And if they dedicate, a second or third guy or the safety, then they'll just get beat by Parker Washington. So I could see this being a Parker Washington game too. So I have interest in these Penn State guys, but it's another case of, who do I fit them in over? Because it's a really, Ohio State and, Jerk at QB, and there's really defined spots. So there's really going to be 1 or 2 spots we're going to have to get different. Perhaps this is one, but really I'm not paying that 8.4 for Dotson over those Ohio State guys very often because, at best, he's probably going to be right around the same score as them for more money. And at worst, he's going to be, 880 and maybe a score. And then we're really screwed because, the guys at 6'8" went for 40 and he went for 18. So there's not a lot of upside to me in your main build going anyone here, but in GPP, if you're thinking maybe Travion Henderson does steal all the touchdowns somehow, then maybe a guy like Dotson makes a lot of sense, but I don't see a lot of plausibility here for my main build. For the sake of time, let's move on to Illinois, Iowa, -13 for Iowa. The lowest total on the slate at 38.5. Initially, I thought because Illinois' rush defense is pretty bad, Goodson might be in play, but it's going to be hard to justify even playing Goodson because even in smash matchups, he really hasn't come through. So what's the deal with Illinois, Iowa?
Yeah, so we'll do the Illinois side first. That one's pretty easy. I'm going to look at my notes. What I wrote was nope. So yeah, don't even really need to mess with Illinois players. If you're trailing by 2 scores and total's only 38, not a lot of points to be scored there, not a lot of fantasy interest. If you want to go nuts with like a Chase Brown, no, don't do that. So I think I felt the same way about King Daru on last week's slate, and it's just you don't do that. So yeah, and then on the Iowa side, I gave a passing glance to Goodson, the kind of the same way that you were thinking about it. And if we didn't have so many other options, if this were like a 4-game slate, and Goodson was at that price, I would have interest. But there's just so many better places to go right around that price, above that price, below that price. I'd have to make more lineups than are legal before I'm getting the ones where I'm putting Goodson in. So yeah, I think we can kind of just skip right over this game and go on to the next one. So I might have gotten most of the good games, but not all of the not all of the games I got were good.
All right. This one's pretty decent. This is one that I like a lot for a GPP, Georgia Tech versus Notre Dame. We have a 17-point spread in favor of Notre Dame, 58.5 over under. So not bad. Georgia Tech games have been really fantasy friendly. You may not know that because they haven't been on the slate a ton, or they've been on some of the secondary slates where I know some of you guys don't play those. Big news here. Jeff Sims didn't play last week. He's officially tagged as doubtful on the website. So Jordan Yates would start in his place. He did last week. Kind of a tough spot against Notre Dame, where I'm having trouble because I would really love to have. I mean, every time this guy's on the slate, I'm talking about Jahmyr Gibbs, I usually play him. He's just one of those guys who is so involved, kind of like a baby Bijan. Maybe I'm going a little overzealous there, but he catches the ball a lot. Targets wise, he's usually getting 7, 8, 9 targets a game, a lot of passing work, and then he generally gets 15 to 16 carries a game too. 6.6 a pretty fair price for him. When if you look at his logs, you're really gonna be like, oh damn, this guy hasn't been under 20 fantasy points since almost beginning of the season. So he is a really good player, but Notre Dame defense, we know, is pretty tough. Now, earlier in the season, I noticed a pattern with Notre Dame where their rush defense wasn't as strong. They got some definite NFL pros in their secondary with their safety Kyle Smith, who I really like. And I used Brian Koback against them at like 2%, and he came through. But then they started tightening things up, and it got a little tougher. So I do think Gibbs can get there because of his passing work. But it's another one of those cases of the slate where he's 6'6", he's above Letty. He's right in that price range of, some of these 7K guys that we're working our way towards, like a Hassan Haskins, perhaps. That makes it kind of tough to use him, but I do think he could get off against Notre Dame. I think their defense, especially recently, has kind of sprung a leak in the passing game a little, where I think he could do some things. As far as their wide receivers go, their best guy is Kyrick McGowan, but he's really kind of hit or miss. I don't think you really want to look here. We did have some success last week with the Notre Dame guy, Braden Lenzy, who's basically almost stoned min again at 3-3. He had 3 catches and 23 yards, a touchdown, and then he had a rush for 31 yards. So they were involving him in the game. At 3-3, if you want a cheap guy, I definitely think he's in the player pool. There's other 3K guys, you speculative who you brought up, Douglas, and there's some other guys at running back who are, barely above 3K that I think are really viable outside of just Johnson. So it's going to be tough to really say, yeah, Braden Lenzy's there. I think a normal slate, I'd be probably, beating the drum on Lenzy a lot more, especially with Avery Davis out. And the target share from Meyer being a little bit more, normal, I guess, as opposed to the beginning of the season when he was Superman. So I definitely like him. Target-wise, he has 37 on the year, 20 catches, 232 yards in the 10 games. One of the few hasn't been hurt. His last couple of games, he's only still been targeted, though, a total of 5 times in those 2. So the target share has really not gone up as much, but the targets are quality. So I definitely think he's in play, but it's not a spot where I'm looking to go too often, I think, which is going to make this game more of a GPP type of game, just because I think there's going to be points scored here. Running back wise, I think we'll probably see a good amount of Kieran Williams ownership, even at 8K. He's projecting pretty high as far as, his raw point total, somewhere between 26, 27 fantasy points. He's a 1K cheaper than, Brian Robinson from Bama, who you're going to talk about in a second. Breece Hall, 400 more than Hassan Haskins. He's got a little more pop than Haskins because he catches the ball as well. I got a little lucky that slate he was on last week. He was chalky, and I went to Rachel White, and against my Huskies, and he went off. And I think this could be that type of game for Williams where he just detonates the slate. So I am a little concerned about being under the field on him, but I don't know where I'm going to get him in when I have prioritized, all these Ohio State guys and paying up for Stroud. Usually I'm paying down at QB, so I can, if I want Williams, I'll go out and get Williams. But this week, if I'm paying for Stroud, I just don't have that luxury. So it's going to be a little bit tougher to get there for me. But again, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kieran Williams, maybe even Lindsey. These guys are all in play. Georgia Tech plays games that typically go fast pace, and they seem to suck people into their tempo. And guys they want to put up stats or what, I don't know what it is, but they seem to get people to play their tempo more than people get them to play their tempo. So I'm definitely on board with exposure to this game, but same old story. Who am I playing them over? So do you find yourself getting to this game in very many of your builds, or is it going to be same situation?
One question, and this actually, you brought up a good point with GGT not really being on a whole lot of main slates.
Yeah,
it's usually a pretty simple decision to play them or not. You're not having to compare them to as many other options as you are when they are on a main slate. One thing I would be interested in is what Gibbs's split looks like with Sims at quarterback versus not with Sims at quarterback, right? Because obviously Sims you have to account for a bunch of different ways, and I don't think Yates is as mobile of a quarterback. Not who is, first of all, but just not that same dynamic profile where you have to account for him. And so I don't have that pulled up or anything. Maybe you have that data easily at hand, but Gibbs in split, out of split with Sims at quarterback, I'd be interested to see where the ceiling games have come for him.
Yeah. So real quick, he was in. So he played pretty significantly. Well, not super significant, but he played against North Carolina. He had a decent amount of snaps, and then obviously against Boston College, both of those games, Gibbs was over 20 carries. So you definitely bring up a good point there about his workload.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess I would be. Obviously, I'm probably not going to go to anyone in this game in cash. I think GPP wise, if I'm doing it, I'm loading up on it, right? So I'm probably getting to all of Gibbs, Williams, and Lindsey in GPP. Just because if it's worth playing one, it's probably worth playing a few of them in there, and it'll be really low owned to have that many pieces of that game. That said, I'm probably not going to do a lot of that. I probably am going to look at Gibbs and end up at Letty as many times as I want to try to play Gibbs. And then with Williams, I get the argument for that. I would be a lot more likely to get there. I still don't know that I'm going to get there as much as the field probably is on Williams. I think he's just a hugely solid back. I don't know that they're going to need to pound him as much as they typically have. And what was the line on this one?
It was 6. Wait, where am I at? 58.5. So it's not as high as you would think. I could see the over though.
Yeah. Williams I'm kind of on the fence about him. I could see him going for like 90 and a touchdown plus like maybe 4 catches for 30 yards. And that's a pretty good game, but I think there are guys that have higher ceilings than that.
Yeah. And if they get out in front, they may not have to run him quite as much. They're kind of in the same situation because Williams and Gibbs both get, pretty decent amount of receiving.
Pretty good workloads. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just seeing, Williams up there around the 3rd or 4th highest, raw point total. And I don't think people are going to look at Robinson too much. I could be wrong, Brian Robinson. So I feel like his ownership might end up being a little higher than maybe we think, which worries me some, but not enough for me to like get off of the receivers that we've already talked about. All right. So a GPP game for sure. I think you can win a tournament with it. Arkansas versus Alabama. We have a 3 touchdown spread, 21 points for Bama, 58 over under. I know we've got some sneakier plays, and then we've got some well-known plays. So break this one down for us.
Yeah. So Arkansas side first, it's going to be a little bit easier. Only 2 guys that I'm really interested in. KJ Jefferson's not one of those guys. I don't like his skill set at all against Bama, and so that's going to leave us with a pretty expensive guy for the context in Treylon Burks, which obviously he's got a ton of talent and he can get separation against, just about anybody. But man, that's quite a bit to pay. It's hard to envision a scenario where I'm looking at him or the Ohio State receivers, especially Wilson, and saying, yeah, I'm going to go with Treylon Burks instead. He'll probably be low owned for that very reason. And if anybody's capable of, breaking one against all odds, Burks has an elite skill set and definitely has that, potential for that we were talking about earlier with Stephon Robinson, that, he can get you there on one play kind of thing. That's in his skill set. But Stephon Robinson was 4,500. Burks is a good amount of salary, right? So, yeah. I think there are spots to use Burks. I don't love him in this spot. We do have to talk about Dom Johnson because he was $3K a week after getting like 17 touches and had a good game. And then he's $3K again because apparently he's just going to be $3K for the rest of the season. And yeah, Bama's a tough matchup, but I mean, this is the RB1 for Arkansas now, right? Like there's other people that are involved, but this is the main guy, and he's not a 30 touch guy like a Bijan would be or a Breece Hall would be, but he's going to get 18 to 20 touches and has the potential to have some passing game work here too. Yeah, he's 3K.
He was low owned too. He was only like 13% on that secondary slate, which kind of surprised me a little bit against LSU.
That weirded me out too. I was like, did we make a mistake? Like, is he dinged up? Is he not going to get all the volume again or something? But he's going up against Alabama, and this is the other side of that coin that I was talking about. It is like anybody can break one at any given time, but I don't necessarily see him as being a guy that's going to just get free and have enough open grass to put up a 70-yard touchdown run on Alabama. So he's the kind of guy that will need to get there through volume, which makes me a little bit hesitant to want to use him because I don't see Arkansas just having the ball enough for him to get the kind of volume that we're going to need. If he gets 15 carries, but they're for 40 yards, well, that sucks. Even at 3K, that doesn't do anything for you, right? So, I think that is more within the realm of possibility this week than it was against LSU, right? I think this is a much tougher defense. On that same in that same vein, in that same train of thought, transitioning over to the Bama side. You can play everyone on Alabama. Everyone's good. You're gonna see all kinds of volume and all kinds of efficiency from these guys. They're Bryce Young. That's a lot. Is he the most expensive QB on the slate, or is Hartman more than?
I think Hartman still. I got this other screen up. It's still Hartman. Yeah. Okay. And then he's third.
And Brennan Armstrong, which we'll get into later, is also 10K, and Bryce Young at 9,800. It's kind of one of those. I'm looking at these plays and I see Stroud cheaper, and I don't know that I'm going to get to Bryce Young a whole lot. Arkansas has a much better defense than Michigan State has. They're not a top-notch defense, but they're way better than Michigan State, especially in the secondary. And I don't see Bama having that same, I guess, chip on their shoulder or need to win by 40 the way that Ohio State might. Arkansas is not up in that same tier where Michigan State thought they were competing for the CFP at one point. Arkansas is not close. So I see this being a get up by 4 scores and then take the foot off the gas kind of game for Alabama, which means that if you want to get to Jameson Williams and John Mechie, who I think are kind of interchangeable. A lot of people prefer Williams. He does seem to score a lot of touchdowns and be pretty explosive. Imagine if he was still on that Ohio State team, how good those receivers
man.
would be.
Ohio State's nuts.
So if you want to go there, just know that you better see those scores happen in the first and second quarter, because I don't really think we're going to see a lot of the deep passing game in the second half for Alabama. What that does mean is that we're going to see a lot of running the ball, and people might say, okay, well then that means we should go to Brian Robinson at 9K, and I don't think that's right either, because there's a lot of injuries in that Alabama backfield. Waddell Williams is gone. Everybody seems to be gone. They're down. They started the season with 5 scholarship running backs, and now they have 2. Brian Robinson and my sneaky flag plant play of the week, which is Trey Sanders. So we talked about a 3K running back on the Arkansas side. I think this is a Trey Sanders game. I think that Alabama is going to be up by enough in the first half and, beginning the second half, that they're going to want to get away from pounding it with Brian Robinson. They're going to have the ball because their defense is pretty good, and Arkansas's offense probably isn't going to move a whole lot. And I think that we're going to get a lot of volume and a good amount of efficiency against a worn down Arkansas defense in the second half. And so if we can get, I think Trey Sanders got, 10, 11 carries, probably look that up, against New Mexico State or whoever the heck they played last week. Let me just find it real quick. So
yeah, it was 12 for 66 and a touch.
Yeah. So if we got that at 3K, I would be fine with that. I think there's the upside for even more. Putting my flag plant on a dude that's 3K that doesn't start is a little different than putting it on TreVeyon Henderson. And obviously we don't need a 30-point game out of him. But if he can get to 100 yards and a score at 3K out of an RB spot, I think everyone in the world will be pretty happy with that, and a guy that's probably not going to be owned at all. So don't do it in your cash games, but for GPP purposes, this is a spot that I really like and am on, even more than the Florida State wide receiver that I was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and I'm not going to rehash the rest of this game. You nailed it. And I like the call on Trey Sanders. I started the season at another company, and in week 1, we did a lot of preview shows, and Trey Sanders was a guy that we had exposure to, and he had a 8 carry, 41 yard, 1 touchdown game. And it seemed like he was going to be an immediate impact to what they do. Didn't quite work out that way, but I mean, he's really young, obviously. And I think he's going to be a big time player for us, next year, but you saw what he could do, last game, and that first game scoring a touchdown. So some of my subs that follow me are familiar with that name. So they're going to perk up when they watch this on demand and hear you say that name. So I dig it. I think he's a really solid call, to the point where, depending on the rest of your build, maybe you could even consider him for cash. It's definitely a little risky, but with all your other pay ups, maybe you can protect yourself. But I don't really like anyone else in this game for my main, just because, like you mentioned, there's potential for blowouts. Arkansas's offenses they looked really bad against LSU. I might have to start thinking, because LSU kind of held their own against Bama too. LSU might not be the targetable team they once were. But yeah, I would like Sanders over Dom. I think if people are going to start commiserating and going over to Dom now, I think it's the time to jump off, because it might be tough for him. So I agree with you on that. All right, SMU versus Cincinnati. This one is interesting. This is the game, and they're 10.5 point favorites for Cincy, 65 over under, which is pretty high total for a Cincy game. That means Vegas thinks SMU is going to score. This is the game that I don't think I remember watching when people were talking about, myself included, about them after they beat Notre Dame, potentially getting a spot in the playoff. This was the game that they had to circle and win. And SMU's kind of stumbled out down the stretch here. Cincinnati's not been winning convincingly. They're probably going to be a stretch for them to get in, even if they win out, but definitely a game they're going to have to win. And it's not a foregone conclusion because they've been struggling against teams like Tulane and Tulsa and giving up points to them. So on the SMU side there, we had that intel and it was all around about, Mordecai, losing snaps to the Stone kid, and it just didn't happen. So coach speak happened and Mordecai threw 54 times and had himself a nice game. I'm not going to be going there against Cincinnati. I don't think anyone else should either, but just know Mordecai may throw 50 times and potentially still eke out 30. It was a running back game for SMU. Bentley finally came back and played. There was talk of him coming back and, he would suit up and then just sit there and not play. He had 14 for 97 and a touchdown, 3 receptions, 21 points. So he's only 3.8. I think, again, it's kind of tough. I still believe in this Bearcats defense, even though they have shown, to be, have chinks in the armor lately. Siggers also had one of his best games of the season, 3 touchdowns scored. Our guy Kohler, who's normally doing NFL and NBA stuff, he pops up and hangs out with us on Saturday mornings for a bit. He was all over Siggers and won him a lot of money. So congrats to Kohler for that. But I just wouldn't be looking at these guys. The prices are nice on them. Where I would look potentially is the wide receiver situation for SMU, because we know they are going to get that volume regardless. And if it's going to be a 60 plus total for a Cincy game, we are going to see SMU score points. Now, Danny Gray is questionable. Jordan Curley's been out for the last couple of weeks. Sounds like he may be done for the season. Gray, to me, I do the message board thing. He hasn't been practicing, so it sounds pretty likely he's going to miss. So obviously, people are going to say, well, Rashee Rice, Robertson, maybe a Calcaterra. Yes. They're in play. But then maybe a little less obvious, and because people don't go down here and see, but we do have another 3K option because I think DK is just glossing over and these 3K guys, and they're just not hitting them in their algo. It's supposed to be done for them, but I think they must be manually changing a lot, and they're not doing it on these guys. So Dylan Goffney is 3K. It could be, construed as a chase. He had 10 catches for 88 yards last week, 12 targets, caught all, 10 of 12. But if Gray misses this high-powered offense, Goffney's going to step into that third role, that third receiver role, and especially with Curley sideline and get that work. So at 3K, he's another guy that I think is borderline cash viable depending on how that Gray news breaks. This is one where I'm a little more, I guess, antsy about because the cheaper running backs, at least we know they're going to get touches. They may not turn them into anything, but they're going to touch the football. There's a solid chance Goffney doesn't even touch the football. However, he did see 12 targets. Hard for me to believe that, Mordecai looked his way 12 times and then would completely ignore him the next week if his guy Danny Gray doesn't go. So I think I'm kind of high on Goffney at this point. I have to definitely rein it in because it's the Bearcats, but at 3K, I definitely like him. Now, with that being said, there's so many other good receivers, and if I'm going, value running back, there's not a need for Goffney. But just keep that name in there with the news breaking here in the next day or so with Gray, potentially being out of the game. With Cincinnati, Ritter is there at 8.9. The last season and a half, I was just making a lot of good money on Ritter at low ownership, and I feel bad because he's my guy, but I really haven't been using him. And I didn't use him. He scored 35, finally hit over that 35 slate breaker number. Only the second time he's been over 30, earlier this season, the very first game against Miami High, he went over 35 and he really just been, it's been the Ford show, but Ford's been banged up and lately Ritter has been stepping up his game. In the last 3, you see he scored 24 or more DK points, 2 rushing touchdowns, and he's been almost, 43 plus rushing yards in each game. So that's more of the Ritter we're accustomed to. Ritter is an excellent GPP play simply because, again, you're not going to go him over Stroud for just a little bit more. But this game has the potential to really be high scoring for a Cincy game. This is a game they got to win. I could see SMU potentially upsetting them and ending any and all talk of a CFP. So it's going to be close. And if they can't close out teams like Tulsa and Tulane, they're definitely not going to close out a high-powered offense like SMU. So Ritter, who you could potentially get at 8 to 9, maybe even less, 5% ownership, on Saturday. It's a really appealing spot for me at 8-9. And if you're running, even if you're only like a 3 to 5 lineup guy, you're not a big multi-enter, I think you would really be making a mistake to not have him in at least one, maybe even two of those lineups. As far as the running backs go, it's kind of tough. It was frustrating on this last Cincy slate because McClellan was the guy, that Charles McClellan that stepped in and got the start and was going to get all these carries. And then he proceeded to not get any touchdowns. Montgomery, right? All these other guys were scoring touchdowns. So I'm not touching that Cincinnati, running back situation. Even if Ford were to return, I think it would be really quite hard for me to feel okay paying 8-4. We got our share of Ford this year and he did us well. I don't need to force him anymore. And then as far as the receivers go with Cincy, I mean, you play Pierce, it's Wiley and Young that go off. You play, Young, then it's Scott that goes off, Tucker, so on. So again, it's really Ritter or nothing for me on the Cincy side. And then on SMU side, if the Gray news breaks the way it sounds like it might, I think Goffney is a borderline cash play. But with that being said, I don't want to burn my flex on a wide receiver because I usually don't do that. But depending on the rest of my build, that might end up happening. And I did have a 2 running back lineup last week, which is totally out of character and goes against my religion, if you will. But the way the offenses are shaking out lately, it's definitely viable to run 4 wide receivers, not just the Mac, if you will. So what do you think, man? SMU Cincy, this could be an upset game for Cincy. Is there any merit to the Goffney talk? I'm sure you looked at him a little bit, but or Ritter in general.
Yeah. So my tendency is to not want to play most players against Cincy. I mean, that's just kind of one of those biases you have in your head. That said, South Florida put up points on them. Like Tulane put up some points, like Tulsa put up some points. I don't know that Cincy is necessarily a defense that we have to shy away from. The opposite of the LSU effect, right? Like we thought LSU this was just this completely attackable defense, and then all of a sudden they start stopping people out of nowhere. I don't know how, and maybe it's because I didn't do a deep dive on this game quite yet, but I don't know how I'm going to get to a ton of individual pieces from SMU. I definitely am not going to get to Mordecai. I can tell you that much, at least. I do think that you have some validity with the receivers, especially, Stoneman, any wide receiver that's going to get a decent amount of volume. And I think we're pretty sure that Gray's out. Like I don't know that there's a lot of question about that.
Okay.
So it's just a question of how that, receiver room gets shaken up. What was Roberson's price? I didn't look.
He's only 4.9, so he'll definitely see ownership anytime under 5K. He draws a decent amount.
I think that's probably the place that I would tend to go. I've had some success with him historically, and also this season getting him right. So that might be a place to go. I might have a little bit more interest there. On the Cincy side, I think I would really love to see that Ford's not playing. If Ford is not playing, I'm really going to have to make a choice between Ritter and Stroud. Because as nice as it is that Stroud's going to throw for 505 touchdowns, Ritter might finally get that game where he runs for 100 and a touchdown and also throws for 203. And so he's going to do it at way less ownership than Stroud is, I think. So I would, if Ford is out, I would really have to give some consideration to Ritter. If Ford is in, man, they just love to run him at the goal line. So I think that I would probably be leaning more towards Stroud and less towards Ritter if Ford is in and, a full go, as opposed to, hey, he's going to warm up. He's going to give it a go in warmups and he's dressed or he's dressed out or whatever the beat reporters love to say.
Oh man. Dressed out. It's a horrible phrase.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I would love to get news at 20 minutes before lock or lock of that game that that Ford is not playing. And if I haven't already played Stroud at that point, I think I'm pretty interested in Ritter.
Yeah. The only issue is, I know you don't have it in front of you, but it is an afternoon game, so we probably won't have that info
in
beforehand.
lineups that I haven't played Stroud, I'm probably leaving that super flex spot open and a lot of salary for it. And if I get the news that Ford's not playing, I'm playing Ritter, and I'm sure there's someone else that I can get to that's around that. Yeah, well, Brian Robinson's in the same place. We can go there. But I mean, there are other places. There's a nice running back at 8,600 that you might have thought about playing a time or two that you could pivot down to if we see that Ford is playing and Ritter's not quite as appealing.
Yeah, and then of course you got, which leads us into the next game, Kenny Heisman, Pittsburgh versus Virginia. We have a -14.5 over under for Pittsburgh, a 66 total. Definitely a game that I feel is another one that may get overlooked. There's several of these games, the Georgia Tech, the SMUs, and then this, that are just not going to get the ownership we're normally accustomed to seeing because of these Ohio States and other Boston College spots that are so obvious. So break this one down for us, because there's definitely a lot I would love to use and may when it's all said and done.
Well, so what is going on with Brennan Armstrong? I think before I can accurately break down this game, I have to know if he is going to play, if he's going to play and he's healthy, if he's not going to play. Like, those are extremely different contexts for this game, and with it being in a 14.5 point spread, I gotta think that maybe he's not going to play, right? So if that's the scenario that we're going with, they didn't do anything against Notre Dame, right? Like that was just, and I think I popped in the Discord and I was like, hey guys, whatever you can get Notre Dame at, get him now, because it's not enough. Like, Virginia is not going to move the ball one bit if they were thinking Brennan Armstrong was going to play and he didn't, and they just got smashed, right? And so if Brennan Armstrong doesn't play, I don't know that changes a whole lot. They don't have much of a running game outside of Brennan Armstrong. I mean, they have some excellent receivers, but you got to be able to get them the ball. And yeah, if you want to get crazy, I think they did make Keaton. How do you say that first name? I struggle with that one.
The announcers just said I heard them say Keaton, so I don't. It looks like it would be weird, but I've heard them on TV twice say Keaton. So
okay, so did they start the slate with him as a quarterback and then make him a wide receiver? I think I saw something about that.
Yeah, because he came into the program as a quarterback, and then DK never changed it, but he was getting the receiving work, and then he became a full receiver.
Right. So he got a good amount of volume, but you can't really go there on this slate. I don't think there's too many other options. And if there's no Brennan Armstrong, and maybe you'd have a difference of opinion on this, but I'm just not interested in touching most of the folks on the Virginia side. If there is Brennan Armstrong, well, that seems like a pretty good game to take the Virginia side of that 14.5 point spread. And I think we would be pretty fortunate to be able to get that number right now if Brennan Armstrong does play. But yeah, then, Wicks, Woods, Thompson, everybody's in play if Brennan Armstrong plays. And I don't see that happening, but it's at least uncertain enough that we have to consider the possibility as of right now, I think. And maybe you have more up-to-date news than I do, but that it seems at least uncertain right now. On the Pitt side, I think we can attack everyone. If you want to play Pickett, again, he's in that same price range with Ritter and Stroud that they're pretty good options too, and it's going to be tough to get there. But Pickett's probably going to be the lowest owned of the three. Nobody thinks that Pickett has the talent that he does. I don't know where this year came from for him. He was a guy that would be like one of our Aiden O'Connell specials, last year, right? He would be like 5 or 6K and you'd play him against a terrible passing defense and he works out once in a blue moon, but he's been awesome. That said, if there's no Brennan Armstrong, they're not going to need him to have a ceiling game in the same vein that Ritter and Stroud would. Maybe Rattler too. Maybe he shows up this week. So that makes me probably a little bit more interested in the running game. I know you're a big Israel Abanaconda guy. 5,300 is a super uncomfortable price for running back. Right, because he's below Letty enough and there's enough of a gap there to kind of consider him differently, but he's definitely higher enough from Rashawn Johnson that this is definitely a mid-range type play. You're not getting a ton of value, but you're also not paying a ton, and he never seems to quite have the volume, I think, is where I would back away from that play a little bit. Like we might see a lot of touches for the Pitt run game, but they might not all go to him, and maybe he gets like 70 yards and a touchdown, which, okay, great. But I think there's a lot of guys that have more ceiling than that. I think Trey Sanders has more ceiling than that, and he's 3K. So smaller slate, sure, I'd be pretty interested. This one, I don't really love it. If Tazir Mack is out, I'm gonna have some interest in Addison and Wayne. Addison is probably going to be lower owned than he should be because of the Ohio State guys and Reed all being kind of in that same price range. Addison seems to get a ton of volume, a lot of PPR work. Obviously, Pickett loves him. If Virginia can somehow stay competitive, or if we get news that Armstrong is in, I think Addison might be the best play on the slate. So that's probably who I'm going to give some GPP consideration to. Or if we get news that Armstrong is in, I'm probably going to give some cash consideration to. He could be incredibly explosive. Wayne is going to be kind of like the poor man's version of that. I think, if Addison was out, then Wayne's a fantastic play. I don't think that we have any concern about that. And so that's going to be kind of a secondary play for me. A little more likely if Armstrong is in, but certainly not as interested as I am in Addison. And then if you all want to go all the way down to short slate specialist Lucas Krull, who's good for probably 3 catches and 20 yards and a touchdown, have at it. I think there are better 3K wide receivers that you probably don't need to go all the way down there. So that's my thoughts on the Pitt side.
Yeah, and it's definitely, you mentioned, Armstrong being the key to this one. Most of the people, and it's not officially beats, but just, looking around and message boards and some of the Twitter talk, most fans that are around the program or people that follow it a lot closer than we do, all seem to think he's not going to play. Now, Coach Mendenhall is kind of, making it seem like he's a true GTD to make, Pitt prepare for him, which is smart, gamesmanship, whatever. So really don't know. It sounds like people that are fans of the team don't think he'll play, but they're really trying to sell that he might. So we'll have to see there. As far as Virginia goes, the only play, that I would be interested in, is definitely not the running game, but Keaton Thompson, I feel like they're always on the later slates and late night slates, but he has really turned the corner, and Billy Kemp's been banged up. Woods has been banged up, and Thompson's target share has just been massive. 12 targets last game against Notre Dame. That was with a horrible backup, Woolfolk, who just couldn't do anything. 10 targets against BYU, 11 against G-Tech, 16 against Louisville, 7 against Duke. So his target share is just crazy good. But, you're talking about his price. It's really hard to justify that 6.8 when you can go 300 to get Addison. But I'm a really big Thompson guy, and I was complaining back earlier this season when DK hadn't changed from a QB yet, but FanDuel did. I was making that complaint on Twitter until it, and I'm not the reason why it changed, but I was complaining until it did, because I had my eye on this kid back then, early in the part of the season. So I definitely want shares. If I can't justify him in the main because, Armstrong status, then I'm going to get GPP shares because, the fact that he did against Notre Dame and BYU are both pretty tough defenses show you that he's going to get enough volume to do damage. And he gets a lot of like the underneath work, middle of the field work. Wicks is that burner deep guy. So Thompson gets a lot of the easy catches where defenses are trying not to get beat by Wicks. So they just let, Thompson get these easier catches, which is great for PPR work. Usually that's Kemp's role, but Thompson's kind of bumped him a little bit. And then as far as Pitt goes, yeah, Wayne's a good price. I could see Wayne drawing a pretty decent amount of ownership. I see people already talking about him quite a bit, with Taser Mack looking doubtful at this point. And then at the running back, yeah, it's tough because Virginia's rush, defense is horrible, right? Like we know that at this point. They're giving up well over 200 yards. I think 222. I just pulled it up. So you can't really trust the running backs for Pitt. Amendola is the best of the bunch, but his touchdown equity the last 5-6 weeks is horrible. He keeps getting pilfered by Vince Davis, who doesn't, so Israel does all the laboring hard work to get him into the red zone, and then Vince comes in and says, "I'll take the touchdown," which he did last game. And then against Virginia Tech, when Israel ran for over 100 yards, Vince felt like taking the touchdown then too. And then even Hammond steals carries. They had this Daniel Carter kid in there for a couple of games earlier this season. So there's just a lot of pilfering going on in this Pitt, game. So if Amendola gets like 70 yards, but no score, you're going to be crippled at that 5.3 price tag. And that's what would keep him off my main lineup. But it also won't surprise me to see, if Armstrong doesn't go, they will give him, 18 to 20 carries. They showed that against the Virginia Tech game where they kind of blew out there. Duke, he only got 10 because it was so out of hand, but I could see him getting enough volume to rack up the yards. I need a touchdown from him at that price, and that's what's going to keep him,
It was kind of the same problem that you were having with the Purdue guys against Northwestern, right? Like you want to play the running back, but who the hell is the running back? And so if it's him and they give him the volume, awesome. It's just it's very touchy to get there. If he was at like the 4K, yeah, I'm a little more interested then.
But for sure.
5.3, that's a lot to ask for a guy who, like you said, hasn't had the touchdown equity and has sporadically got volume, not consistently got volume.
Yeah. All right, so news to monitor for that. 2 games left here. We have Michigan versus Maryland. Michigan 14.5 favorite, 57.5 over under. Maryland back to irrelevancy. They had their time to shine last week. They did us good. My guy Okongwu still pretty cheap, but I'm not going to go there. It looks to me like Haskins, and this is a pretty, as long as Blake Corum is out, he's highly questionable yet again. He didn't even travel last time. That seems like he's trending that way again. Haskins is a really solid play. The price is up on him, obviously at 7.6, but if he's going to get 31 carries, 27, 23, he's not having to split with Corum. He's a really solid matchup against Maryland, who on paper is giving up 154 rushing yards. They had some, you talked about Maryland when we were talking about them last week. You mentioned that, Baby Tua looks so good. They had a lot of cupcake opponents early, which allowed them to rack up the defensive stats. And then once they started playing actually good running backs, like against Minnesota, they gave up 139 to Kai Thompson, 105 to Marquise Irving, and both those guys are kind of middling, right? And then against Indiana, we know Stephen Carr went for 136 and 2. Kenny Walker, who kind of he struggled in the first half, surprisingly, but then he ended up getting there in the end with 143 and 2 touchdowns. It wasn't quite to the ceiling we were looking for those that used them, but it was good. So I would expect Haskins, if he gets anywhere close to 30, carries, which he probably will, as long as Corum's out, he's going to be a high scorer. I do see here, looking at, there's only a couple of places that really project out, there's 2 or 3 of them, whatever. Haskins is definitely on the top 2 or 3 scores. I see him right behind Brian Robinson from a raw projection. I think he's going to end up drawing a lot of ownership because of, Corum's out. People are programmed with NBA, NFL and stuff. Well, this guy, player A is out. Player B is going to get all the volume. I got to play him. And that doesn't always work in these collegiate sports, but it would work here with Haskins. So I do admit I like him. I do also admit that I'm going against my philosophy that's profited me all season, which is pay up at running back and run 3 to 4 of them. I feel like I'm close to running 2 of them and they're going to be super cheap. So I feel a little weird about it, but it's going to be tough. There's 2 running backs who, like we mentioned Kieran already and Haskins, that I think I may end up being under the field on. And it's not because I want to, it's just, I've really prioritizing these receivers this week and the quarterbacks. So it's going to be tough for me to get these, because I'm going to have to decide if I go Haskins, next to Rashawn, then that means that WR3 spot's not going to be able to go to a Jaden Reed or a David Bell, who I'm not really on anyways, or, one of these other guys from SMU. It's going to have to go down to be one of those, Goffneys, who I don't hate, or maybe I get my guy Stephen Robinson. So it really depends. I've gotten the build as far as, 2 Ohio State guys, the 2 QBs, Roshan. I've got 2 or 3 spots that I have to decide on, and I've got some combos I like. And I'm a type of guy that runs one lineup in my main, like for my main and cash single entry. I'll run some alts in tournaments, but I don't really hedge for cash because I feel like it's a losing proposition long term. So I'm gonna have to make a decision on, I'll have this 2v2 or 3v3, and if I get it wrong, you'll hear me in the Discord, bitching about it all day. But that's the game we play. So as far as the Maryland side, it's a hard fade. Like I said, we got what we needed out of them. We can probably put them away for the rest of the season. And as far as Michigan's passing game goes, I could see them moving the ball pretty easily. Maryland's defense as a whole, it feels like they quit. They came back and they looked good last week because of the defense they faced, but all other games they've played in conference, they really look like they've quit early. The prices on the receivers for Michigan make it an easy fade, though. 5.2 for Corny. Anthony's 5.1. Ali, who some people were playing heavily a couple weeks ago, which was kind of a surprise to me, is 4.1. So I'm not really looking at anyone here besides Haskins, and I think that's probably going to be the case across the industry. So Haskins is a guy that get the volume. Neither of us used him last week, and then he ended up, doing pretty well in this particular matchup and the build, because we're kind of lockstep, with each other this week. It sounds like, are you going to, knowing that he's probably going to be chalky, are you looking to get there as well, or what do you think?
I really like him for cash, is what I'll say. I'm not sure how I'm going to get there. Kind of same issue as you, but I think that he has enough separation from those 9K guys that I think have probably a similar floor. I think he and Breece Hall have a pretty similar floor this week. I think Breece Hall is a better running back, but I think the matchup is just fantastic for Haskins, and I think they're gonna give him a lot of volume, which they can afford to do because they haven't pounded him, 35 times a game like Kenneth Walker gets. So I think that price makes him very appealing for cash. So if you need 3 RBs for cash, Rashawn, Letty, and Haskins are probably not a terrible way to go. That's probably where I'm sitting right now for cash. I don't see a ton of appeal for him in GPP. Not because I don't think he has the ceiling. I think that anybody can break some explosive runs against a pretty bad Maryland defense. But I think the ownership is going to be way up there for him for GPP purposes. So I'm probably going to look to differentiate. And those are 3 running backs I talked about already. I probably can't do all 3 of those and also play my guy Trey Sanders. So that's going to make it tough to get to him for GPP. Whereas Sanders is a much more of a GPP type play. So I think depending on what contest you're in, you're either very much in on Haskins or probably not getting there.
Yeah. And with Corum, Blake Corum, such a stud, he was getting most of the receiving work where Haskins wasn't. And that's one thing that Haskins has had to kind of help his I guess, his ceiling a little bit. He has 8 receptions the last 3 weeks, was capped with a 5 for 45 game last week. So he's getting a little bit of receiving work, but yeah, he's still kind of capped at that, seems at that like 28, 29 mark. When you, at this price now, you'd like to see him hit a 30 plus, especially without Blake Corum. So the fact that he's not hitting that is a little concerning for GPP. So I definitely agree with you there. It would be kind of nice if Corum actually surprise played, because he's only 6K and he would absolutely murder this matchup, but I don't think he's gonna. All right, last game on the slate, and it's probably going to be a quick one to go over. We got Nebraska versus Wisconsin, -9 Wisconsin. I think they might win by more, and it's a 43 over-under. So our guy Braylon Allen came through in a big way. He was like 40% in all contests, so high owned, but it was like if that 60% was, not in on him, which they weren't, they were done. He had a massive game, career game, and the kid's only 17. So we're going to get a couple seasons of 8K, 9K Braylon Allen, riding him to the profit in these good matchups. Spent over 100 yards and every single game that he's played pretty much. Except for his first 2 when he got some spot duty. What do you think about this game? Obviously, Nebraska's in a tough spot, but Braylon Allen at 8.6 now, is he still in play, or is it a little bit more GPP now?
Yeah, so I don't want anybody from Nebraska.
Agreed.
So Braylon Allen is super interesting, and so I think he's kind of the inverse of Haskins for me. I think that that's a lot to allocate for cash. If I'm playing 3 running backs, if I'm playing 4 running backs, then he becomes, if I am not playing Stroud in my super flex spot and I get news that Ford is in, for example, I think he's a really nice piece for that last spot. If I'm coming off of Ritter. And so that's a scenario that I could see, going to a lot of Braylon Allen. Or if I'm ahead in cash games going into that 12:30 slot and I still have that spot available, maybe I go to him for the guaranteed work, as opposed to not that Ritter's like a super high variance guy, but we haven't necessarily seen a ton of floor for him in games that they start just running the ball a ton. So I don't know quite what to do with him. I think he's probably a better GPP play than a cash play, but I can also see circumstances in which he would make a ton of sense for cash. If you're protecting a lead, right? Like much like he protects the lead for Wisconsin, which I envision he'll do plenty of in this game. I think the volume is going to be there. I think they're going to have the ball a ton. The Nebraska defense isn't anything to shy away from. So I want to find a way to get there. I really do. I don't know what that is quite yet, but I do like the play. I want to have at least some exposure. I think that's as far as I'll go right now.
For sure. All right, so that wraps up the slate breakdown. We're going to talk about PrizePicks, but before we do that, and it's a little bit not as hard, I guess. Well, it's I think harder than last week, but maybe not necessarily super hard. What are you looking at as like a 3-man core at the moment?
I mean, do we count Jerkovich? Because like that's kind of
we'll remove him from the equation since he's kind of the free square that everyone will have. What's your other, I guess?
I think I'm going with Letty Brown, Garrett Wilson, and probably CJ Stroud are my core, which pigeonholes me into a 2 QB build, but I think that's probably my core.
Yeah, I like that. So for me, I'm gonna say Roschon Johnson, who I usually like to pay up at running back, but that's probably I'm cheating a little bit with that one. I don't want to give away too much. I want you guys to look at the article when you see my core for less obvious plays, I guess. And then as far as wide receivers go, I think I'd have to say Garrett Wilson with you as well. It's just too cheap of a play for him anytime he's under 7K. You really want to use him. And then I would say I want to say Haskins. I was not on the fence with Haskins. I wanted to see what you would say on him too, because like I said, I think he's going to be kind of high owned. So I just wanted to get kind of some reassurance on him, because I've been more of a Corum guy, but I think at this point I would have to core Haskins and this take my WR3 as kind of a cheaper guy instead of trying to do the Trey Sanders thing, because I think Trey Sanders is a good option to try out, but I also don't want to get, messed around with like we did on a couple of cheap ones that we take shots at from time to time in cash, which I do on some of the secondary slates sometimes. And it just, I can't afford for my main with the action I play to get hurt. So Haskins, Johnson, and Wilson. So kind of boring, I know. All right, prize picks. Let me pull that up. I'll go first. I know you were saying, I think you had Stroud on the mind, so we'll get that. But Benjamin Urasek, the tight end from Stanford, that seemingly the FTN Discord is really the only people who use him. I know there was some slates that came out after he kind of burst out on the scene where people were on him, but he's usually low owned. His receptions total is 3.5. The Stanford team has been banged up at the receiver spot, and Urasek as a pass catching tight end has really stepped up and done a lot with his targets. He's only been hovering around 6 targets on average, but he catches 80% of those pretty consistently. And like last week, he only had 2 catches, but one of them was a touchdown. So he usually comes through for me. I like him for 4+ receptions. What is this? Let's see. What's Stroud? Let's pull up Stroud, because that was one you're on, right? Yep. Which I agree with. Where is it? 3. I don't even see it now.
Are you talking about his passing yardage total?
Yeah, you have it in front of you?
Yeah, it's
there it is. 317. Okay.
317.5, yeah.
Yeah, so that's got to be an easy over then for sure. If guys like O'Connell can throw 500 and maybe 2 other, there should be no problem with that. Rushing yards, man, they're trying to bait us on a few of these. Like normally you'd look at Kenny Walker 99.5 and be like, easy, but wow, man, that's a tough one to bait. Look at, and even the CJ Stroud rushing yards 0.5, they really want to bait you. But seriously, Letty Brown 87.5. I know that people might look at that and go, I don't know, but it's that Texas matchup. I'm pretty confident in him hitting 100. I know you're pretty confident in him hitting 100. So I would be looking at the 87.5 on him, most definitely. What are some others? All right, do you have it in front of you, or do you want me to throw some other numbers at you?
I do have it in front of me.
Okay.
So the ones that I had so far were Stroud over 317.5.
Okay.
Letty over 87.5.
That seems fair.
I've got Brees over 97.5, and I've got Hassan Haskins over 97.5. So basically, I've got running backs that are going to get over 100 yards. 2 of them slightly under 100 yards. One of them significantly under 100 yards are what the numbers come in at. They're all going to get over 100 yards. And so that is silly that they think they're not. So I think I'm going to go over on all those. And as strongly as I feel about that, I feel even more strongly about Stroud going over 317.5 passing yards. I just like, if we have 3 receivers that we think can all get to 100 yards in that same game, I think somebody else gets 17, 18 passing yards, receiving yards in the game. So, yeah, I mean, I'm so far over. Like if Stroud's number was 417.5, I might think about it, but I'd probably still be on the over. 317.5 is way too low.
No, I definitely agree. So yeah, I would be hitting all those. Like I mentioned, Urasek for me, some of the kind of maybe off kilter ones, and then Deuce Vaughn. They're playing Baylor, so maybe that scare people a little bit. But his receiving yards are 34.5, which seems very low for Deuce, even against Baylor. Is that one you're on as well?
That was one that I was on as well, and he's he wasn't on is he even on the main slate? He's not.
No, he might be on FanDuel. I admittedly haven't dug into
Yeah.
FanDuel yet. I'm starting that
Well,
right
I
up.
think that's probably why it wasn't top of mind right now. But Deuce, his rushing yardage total was it like 82 or something like
Yeah.
that? Why? I don't understand that at all. Who's held Deuce to less than 100 yards ever? Like that's not going to happen. I mean, that could be 2 carries for him, right? So, Deuce over, is it 82 or 82 and a half?
I think it's 82.5 now.
Yeah, I think that one would be even more in play than both Haskins and Hall, because obviously 97.5, even though they're facing they're in better matchups. I think the Deuce number is just absolutely ridiculous. I don't understand that number one bit.
Yeah, they might be respecting the Baylor defense a little too much, but at this point we know he's matchup proof. So I like the receiving number on him for sure, and definitely rushing as well. And then I have one more. My guy, it's another one that FTN guys only play, although he's been a little popular recently, as Puka Nacua. They have a nice game on tap, another lower end opponent. It's 82.5 receiving yards. He did have the game against Washington State where he kind of blanked, but 3 of his last 4, he's been over 107 yards. So give me Puka Nacua all day. That's my guy. He's gonna have a big number against them. So lots of soft ones this week. It's funny. The first time you started playing was last week, right? Like you discovered that you could play. They've been soft on college football like all season. So you're going to love hitting these through the last couple weeks in bowl season, because they're definitely softer at football, and I don't challenge them than they are basketball. So just keep that in mind as you're going through the next few weeks. Their CFB is very beatable.
Yeah, no, I'm enjoying it for sure. It's like, since we're already in the DFS mindset, and anybody's watching probably is too. It almost seems like we're potentially sharper than the people setting these numbers sometimes. So anytime you're in that situation, you don't see that a whole lot. That's an exciting place to be.
For sure. All right. And I think that wraps it up. Good stuff as always. There will be an article out for the main slate tomorrow. And then also there's a 5-gamer for Friday that I will also be releasing. Jake will be doing the Saturday night slate. He drops that right up Saturday morning, early afternoon type. And then next week we'll be back every Thursday until the season's over. Some bowl coverage planned, all kinds of good stuff. So very, very excited. Jake, thank you for joining me yet again. Good stuff. Always gives me something to think about and chew on after we talk. I like talking strategy with you, so I appreciate it, my good friend.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Let's go crush it.
All right. Take care, guys. Thank you very much. Best of luck. And make sure that you get over to FTN Daily and jump on that gold package. Use DUB as the code for 20% off. Like I said, the Discord alone is worth the price of the subscription, so that you will not miss any late scratches. Thanks, guys. Best of luck to everyone out there. See you later.